Sometime in 1989, John Deacon drove to Mountain Studios in Montreux. He drove himself. He did not call ahead. He arrived at the studio the way he always arrived, without announcement, without ceremony, carrying his bass. He went in.He set up.He played whatever he was asked to play. And then he left. And the next morning he came back. This happened across 18 months. March 1989 to November 1990. The Innuendo sessions. The last Queen album made, while Freddie Mercury could still stand for the full length of a recording day. John Deacon was there for all of it. Every session. He never missed one. He never offered an explanation for showing up. He never said, "I'm here because Freddie is dying and I want to be present for whatever time is left." He never said anything like that. He came. He played. He left. He came back. And Brian May, who has described those 18 months in more interviews than he can count, has said about John Deacon's presence in those sessions exactly one thing. He said it once. He has never repeated it. He said, that was the most John thing he ever did. This is the story of what the most John thing meant, and why Brian May has only said it once. The Innuendo sessions began in March 1989 and ran, in fragments and bursts, for 18 months. They were held primarily at Mountain Studios in Montreux, Switzerland, the studio Queen had used since the 1970s. The studio they had built into a second home. The studio where Freddie Mercury was most comfortable in the world. They moved sometimes to Metropolis Studios in London. They worked around Freddie's treatment schedule and physical capacity. Some days he could record for 4 or 5 hours. Some days less. The sessions were adapted to him, to what he was able to do on a given afternoon, to what the illness allowed. The band had known since the late 1980s. Freddie had told them. He had not made an announcement out of it. He had said, "I don't want anything to change. Get on with business as usual." There wasn't any self-pity, Brian May has said. There wasn't any visible collapse. There was Freddie Mercury in a studio, making an album, asking to be treated as the same person making the same album he would have made if the diagnosis had not existed. The band obliged. They showed up. They made the album. And John Deacon showed up for every session without a single word of explanation. John Deacon was not the most present member of Queen outside the studio. He had a wife and 6 children in Surrey. A domestic life that was the counterweight to everything the band required. He came for the sessions. He played. He went home. This had been the pattern across 20 years. Not coldness. The specific settled life of someone who found, in the band, the work, and found, in Surrey, the rest. And then the Innuendo sessions began. Something had changed that made the sessions require more than music. The person at the center of them was dying. Slowly. With the specific trajectory of someone who is still capable of work and who has asked everyone around him to treat it as normal. And John Deacon, who had always come when the work was scheduled, showed up for every session. Not just the ones that required him. All of them. All of them. This is the specific and unremarked quality of what John Deacon did across those 18 months that Brian May has never been able to fully explain, and has only described once. The sessions did not always require all 4 of them. Some days Freddie was recording vocals with the production team, and no instruments were needed. Some days Brian May was laying guitar parts that only Brian May needed to be there for. Some days the work was administrative, listening to mixes, making decisions about arrangements. John Deacon did not need to be there for all of these. He came anyway. He sat. He listened. He offered what he could offer when it was needed. He went home. He came back the next morning. For 18 months. Brian May was there. Roger Taylor was there. John Deacon was there. And the specific thing about John Deacon's presence was that it was never explained, never referred to, never acknowledged as anything other than John Deacon doing what John Deacon did, showing up. Mountain Studios sat above Lake Geneva. Queen had bought it in 1978. It had the warmth of a place lived in, rather than simply used. Freddie had an apartment nearby. He knew the lake and the restaurants. He had said Switzerland was the only place he felt truly private. In the Innuendo sessions, Mountain Studios was the place where the music was still just the music. Not a statement. Not a tribute. Just the band working on the album the way they had always worked. Brian May, with a guitar part he was unhappy with. Roger Taylor, with a lyric needing another pass. John Deacon, with the bass lines that held the song together, from underneath.Freddie Mercury, at the microphone. Or, at the piano. Or, increasingly, in the chair. Freddie Mercury recorded some of the innuendo vocals from a chair. This is the specific physical detail that marks the distance between the Freddie Mercury who had run across Wembley Stadium at Live Aid and the Freddie Mercury who was in Mountain Studios in 1990. He could not always stand for the full length of a session. He sat. He sang from the chair. The voice was still his voice. The four-octave instrument that Brian May had described as the anchor of the group. The voice that George Michael had found one note of at the tribute concert and Brian May had called pure Freddie. The voice was there. The body around it was less there than it had been. And John Deacon, who came to every session, was present for the sessions when Freddie sang from the chair. He was in the room when the chair was there. He did not say anything about the chair. He did not remark on it. He treated it as Brian May had been asked to treat everything, as business as usual. As the same album they would have made if the chair were not necessary. He came. He played. He said nothing about the chair. He went home. He came back. The song called The Hitman is not the most famous song on Innuendo. It is not Innuendo itself, which reached #1 in the UK. It is not These Are the Days of Our Lives, which would become the final single released before Freddie's death. It is a hard rock track, the longest sustained heavy rock piece on the album, and its construction is documented in more detail than most of the album's songs. Freddie Mercury had sketched the melody on keyboards. Brian May had heard it, transposed it, recorded a demo. And then John Deacon restructured the whole thing. He took the song apart and put it back together in a different form, and all four of them finished it together. This is what John Deacon does that nobody talks about. He restructures. He finds the architecture beneath the song. He hears what the song needs to become, and he makes it become that. Not with words. With the bass and the arrangement sense and the specific structural intelligence of someone who has been the quiet center of a band for 20 years, and who knows, better than anyone, what holds a song together. The Hitman is a John Deacon song. His name is not on it. It is on the album that Freddie Mercury made from a chair. It is on the album that Freddie Mercury made from a chair. And this is the thing about the Innuendo sessions that the most John thing captures. The sessions were not simply about making the album. They were about the specific act of four people maintaining the form of what they had always done, in the presence of a fact that made maintaining that form an act of love rather than simply an act of work. Freddie had asked for business as usual. He had asked not to be treated differently. He had asked for the specific dignity of being the same person making the same album in the same studio he had always used. And the band gave him that. Brian May gave him that. Roger Taylor gave him that. John Deacon gave him that. But John Deacon gave it differently. He gave it by not saying anything. Not about the illness. Not about the chair. Not about the fact that the sessions were scheduled around treatment. He came. He played. He restructured the Hitman. He sat in the room when Freddie sang from the chair. And he did not make any of it into a statement. He just kept showing up. Brian May noticed he was in the room. He has described those 18 months in interviews, documentaries, books, Freddie's voice. The chair. Freddie showing him the foot. And the face Brian made. And Freddie's apology. Writing mother love, line by line, Freddie singing each one 3 times. The specific and sustained experience of being in a studio with someone who is dying, who is asked to be treated as someone who is not. Brian May described all of this. And somewhere across all of those descriptions, he noticed John Deacon. The showing up. The coming back. The sitting in the room. The saying nothing. The going home. The coming back the next morning. 18 months. And then, years later, in one interview, he said the sentence, "That was the most John thing he ever did." He has not elaborated. The sentence has no follow-up. It stands alone. The way John Deacon's presence stood alone. Without explanation. Without ceremony. There. The most John thing he ever did. This sentence requires unpacking in the way that the simplest sentences require unpacking, because their simplicity is not emptiness, but compression. What is the most John thing? The most John thing is showing up without saying why. The most John thing is being present in a way that never asks for acknowledgement. The most John thing is doing what the situation requires before the situation has to ask for it. John Deacon has never, in 20 years of Queen and 30 years since, been the person who performed his feelings. He has never been the person who made his loyalty into a statement. He has been the person who played the bass, who restructured the song, who found the architecture underneath. And in the Innuendo sessions, when the situation was Freddie Mercury in a chair, and the album being made around whatever Freddie was able to give, on a given afternoon John Deacon found the architecture underneath that too. The architecture of showing up. The architecture of presence, without explanation. The architecture of, I am here. I will keep being here. I will not make this into anything except the work. The most John thing he ever did. The most John thing he ever did. And Brian May said it once. In one interview. He has not repeated it. This is the specific quality of the sentence. It does not bear repetition. It is already complete. Saying it again would turn it into something it is not. The sentence is the compression of 18 months of observation, of watching John Deacon come through the door every morning, of watching him sit in the room, of watching him play and restructure and say nothing about the chair, and go home and come back. Brian May watched all of this for 18 months, and then, years later, found the sentence that contained it. The most John thing he ever did. Not. John was loyal. Not. John supported Freddie. Not. John showed up. These would all be true. They would all be smaller than the sentence Brian May chose. The most John thing. In the sentence, the whole person. The 20 years of understanding what John Deacon was. And the 18 months of watching what John Deacon did with who he was, in the sessions where everything else was ending. Innuendo was released on February 4, 1991. It debuted at #1 in the United Kingdom. It had been made over 18 months at Mountain Studios in Metropolis around Freddie Mercury's treatment schedule. In the sessions that John Deacon attended, without exception, the title track opens the album. It runs to 6 minutes and 31 seconds. It contains a flamenco interlude played by Steve Howe of Yes, who had come to visit and was asked to play. It contains the orchestral crescendo that Freddie Mercury built from a melody he heard being played by the other three in the studio below while he was upstairs. The Show Must Go On closes the album. It was written for Freddie Mercury by Brian May, in the specific knowledge of what the Innuendo sessions had been. Brian May was not certain Freddie could sing it. He gave it to him anyway. Freddie went into the studio and sang it in one take. Brian May has said, I don't know how he did it. I don't know where he found it. He found it. And John Deacon was in the studio when that take happened. He was there. He heard it. He said nothing. He went home. He came back the next morning. After Innuendo, the band went back into the studio. Made in Heaven. The sessions in which Freddie Mercury recorded his final vocals. The sessions that would produce the posthumous album. The sessions where Brian May wrote Mother Love line by line, and Freddie sang each line 3 times. John Deacon was there for those sessions too. He was there for the Innuendo sessions and the Made in Heaven sessions, and the session where Freddie asked Brian May to write him stuff because he knew he didn't have very long. He was there in May 1991 when Freddie Mercury recorded the last vocal of his life. He was there for all of it. And then Freddie Mercury died on November 24th, 1991, and John Deacon played the tribute concert in April 1992. And John Deacon played the final session in Paris in January 1997. And then John Deacon said, "I can't do this anymore." And he went home. And he has not come back. The man who showed up for every session of the last album and the last sessions and the final session of all went home. He went home the same way he had always come, without announcement, without ceremony, without explanation. Without explanation, this is John Deacon, showing up, without explanation, leaving, without explanation. The most John thing he ever did was showing up. The second most John thing he ever did was stopping, both, without a word, both, without the performance of a decision. Brian May, notice the showing up. He said it once. He has never fully said what John Deacon stopping meant. He has said, "We don't speak," which is a shame. He has said, "We have his blessing." He has said, "It goes through the accountant." He has never used a sentence as compressed and as complete as the one he used for the Innuendo sessions, the most John thing. Maybe because the stopping does not compress the same way. The stopping is not the most John thing. It is the most painful thing. The showing up is the most John thing. The 18 months. The chair. The saying nothing. The coming back. This is what Brian May noticed. This is what he compressed into the one sentence he said once. This is what John Deacon gave across 18 months to the person he had been playing music with since he was 19 years old. He came. He stayed. He said nothing. He came back. March 1989. Mountain Studios, Montreux. John Deacon arrived. He set up. He played. He left. He came back the next morning. 18 months. Every session. He never missed one. He never said why. Freddie Mercury in a chair. John Deacon in the room. The hitman. John took it apart and put it together. The show must go on. John was in the studio when Freddie sang it in one take, the last vocal. John was there. He never said a word about any of it. He went home. He came back. 18 months. And then years later, Brian May was asked about those sessions. He said many things. And at some point, he said one sentence. He said that was the most John thing he ever did. He did not elaborate. He did not explain. He said the sentence and moved on the way John Deacon showed up and moved on. The way John Deacon did everything. The most John thing. Coming when it mattered. Saying nothing. Being there. 18 months. Every session. The chair. The music. The bass. The coming back. Every morning. The most John thing he ever did.